I have one of the most primitive wood stove waffle irons. My son got it at a estate auction, and I was going to make that baby work. And I knew that it had to be really hot. Anyway, one of the handles was broken. There's a piece of wood stuck in it, like a limb of a tree or something. And I had 5 failures. I mean, total failures. But I got onto it, and when I got the temperature just right, and I flipped it, you have to flip them over.
Yep.
And when I flipped it and I opened it up, I had a perfect waffle. But that's how you learn anything in life. You don't give up.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com. Well, what does an almost 89-year-old woman wake up and do at 5 o'clock in the morning these days?
Well, that's easy to do. You just hop out of bed and you're in motion because you've been laying there for 10 minutes knowing what you're going to do.
Okay.
You plan it.
You plan. That's what you do when you first wake up in the morning is plan your day for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you hop out of bed. Then what? You did some gardening today?
Yeah, after all the necessary things that you have to do. This morning I just dressed hurriedly and ran and got in my car and drove over to the garden, one of my gardens, and turned the water off because I didn't want to wake up the people in the house to turn it off, and it needed to be turned off. And so then I came back and parked the car in front of my chicken pen, and I had their water and feed and the chicken bucket of scraps and fed the chickens. They didn't need to be woke up. They knew I was coming. And then I picked grass or fresh alfalfa to supplement their wheat or laying mash because they just lay yellow yolks when you feed them, green grass. And I get a kick out of free range because that's they gave a name to something that we've always done. And but you can't free range now because the neighbors' dogs eat them, the chickens. And you can't have roosters because it wakes up the neighbors. So it's kind of a different deal than living way out in the country.
Yeah, you're still pretty far out here. I mean, we've got neighbors a couple 100 yards away.
Yeah, no, this is country. I've never lived in town. I can't live in town. But no, I have really nice neighbors, and I did get rid of the rooster because it was understandable that it was waking them up at 4 a.m, and they waited a year to tell me this. That was nice, and so I got rid of the rooster.
Roosters are kind of a menace anyways.
Yeah, they do have a function, though, and that's to raise baby chicks, and that kind of threw a little monkey wrench into my chicken management because raising baby chicks is a pain, but the way you do it is have a rooster. Well, it's necessary to have a rooster because your eggs won't be fertile, and you have to have hens that like to set. They bred them for laying now, and they don't like to sit. But if you get ones that like to sit and they're part jungle fowl or banty, well, they're good. So you just let them lay a clutch of eggs and let them sit on them and let them hatch them, and then they raise them. And you don't have to do anything. They protect them from the predators, and that's the only way to go. So this year we got little chicks because my chicken flock got out of hand, and it was like 6 generations inbred. And we disproved the theory that you can't do that because they were all laying and they were extremely hardy, but they looked funny. Feathers on their feet. Anyway, long story short, I had to get rid of my other ones and start all over again with pullets.
What's a pullet?
A pullet is a teenage chicken.
Okay. So somewhere between a chick and a chicken that can lay an egg.
And it's a female.
Yeah.
A female that's your future egg layer, your mature hen. But pullets lay about 6 months. That's about the average of when a pullet starts to lay. And she lays little bitty eggs, and they grow larger incrementally. And mine are at the stage now where they're laying beautiful brown eggs and getting bigger every day. And the only thing is that, well, it's a long story, but my daughter-in-law hatched out some eggs from a lady that raised chocolate chickens. And they aren't chocolate chickens. They have a long name I can't pronounce, but they lay chocolate-colored eggs. Anyway, they hatched, and one hatched. The rest of them weren't any good. They were rotten. Evidently not fertile, and they were rotten. But one chick laid, and so she tenderly took care of it, but it was lonely. So she bought a chick at the Greenger's and put it in there, and wouldn't you know, that chick grew up to be a rooster. So I have a rooster down there that's going to have to get the axe and get his head chopped off, and he's going to have to be a fryer for Sunday dinner. But he hasn't started to crow yet. So until he crows,
yeah,
the neighbors don't know.
Sure. So as long as he's a quiet rooster, he gets to live. But as soon as he becomes a noisy rooster, you're going to kill him and have him for dinner.
If he's a smart rooster, he won't crow.
I think eventually he'll crow. What do you think?
I don't know. They used to call me Chicken Jane when I worked at the Grain Growers. I know far too much about chickens, and I have never ever had a rooster that didn't crow. So this one's a study, you know. He's ugly as heck. He's gangly, and he's already, you know, performing like a rooster. And the hens got together, and they don't like him.
What's ripe in your garden right now?
Zucchini, that's the easiest thing to raise. Crookneck,
oh my gosh!
squash.
Everywhere I go, people are trying to give me zucchinis right now.
You have never eaten them properly prepared, obviously. You rub them in olive oil and garlic, and you grill them. You cut them up and saute them in olive oil and with garlic and herbs and scrambled eggs and onions and tomatoes. Oh, there's so many ways, you know. How do people normally cook zucchini that you don't like it?
I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm just saying everywhere I go, like everybody's got zucchini right now. You know.
Yeah, lock your doors.
I go down to my mom's to get eggs, and she won't give me eggs anymore unless I take zucchini with me. It's like, good grief. It's getting out of control.
Yeah, it is. And then, but as of late, it's gotten really popular because people go, "Did you bake zucchini bread yet?" No, I can't find any zucchini. And then they come up with all these recipes. But it's a very satisfying vegetable to raise because it's like radishes, you know. I read a thing one time that was really funny that if you want to grow zucchini, you plant it, and then you just kind of chop it up with a shovel and turn the hogs in, and then you have enough zucchini. It doesn't get out of hand, but it won't die. That's how hardy it is. It just, you know, it's very hardy. And there's all kinds of jokes about it. And, of course, around here, you do have to lock your car when you go to church or anything because it'll be full of zucchini when you come out.
Yeah, and then squash later on. Everybody ends up with so much squash. It's ridiculous.
Well, crookneck squash is another color. I come from California a long time ago, and people say I say squash and wash, and I do, but that's normal. But they say it's squash and wash. So, I apologize to anybody that listens to this. But crookneck squash is what my grandma Wilson raised in Rio Linda, California. She lived to be almost 103. And when it was producing, she ate it 3 times a day. So I do too. And it's so good. And you don't need to doctor it up. Just parboil it with butter, a lot of good butter, and salt and pepper.
I really like acorn squash.
Yes.
Those are good.
Baking squash. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A little brown sugar, a little butter, a little bit of salt.
Yeah. Hard to beat.
Yeah.
And
it's easy.
Colored vegetables, according to my eye doctor, the more colorful, the better. Like I have the beginning of macular now because 1 in 3 people that are old get macular, but I think I've arrested it by eating a lot of colorful vegetables, and squash is colorful.
Okay. Well, this weekend is the beginning of archery season, and I'm curious about this in your lifetime because, gosh, you were born in 1933, so only 20 years before that, maybe less, would have been when Ishii came out of the mountains of California and reinvigorated archery in America and made archery what it is today. Ishii was the last wild Indian, is kind of the way he's described. He was living in the Mendocino National Forest. He'd lost all of his family, lost all of his tribe, and he eventually, was just dying of loneliness and came.
I read about I read the book 6 times.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah. But Saxton Pope, who was a professor, basically befriended him and learned about archery because of him, and then ended up traveling the world and learning archery from other places. And Pope and Young is the name of the archery record book after Saxton Pope, but really it's because of Ishii. So not too long before you were born is when, archery got this spark that grew again. And today, archery is more popular than it ever has been. When do you remember people beginning to bow hunt?
Not till you were my grandson.
Really?
Really. Yeah.
I
mean, when I grew up, and nobody hunted meat with, they used guns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it, really started to gain in popularity in the 60s, 70s. But I was curious to your recollection when you're starting to see people hunt with bows.
No, in the foothills I grew up in Northern California were black-tailed deer.
Yeah.
And my family didn't hunt them. I was married young, and my husband, your grandfather, he hunted. That got me into the hunting. My daddy was a dairyman, and he didn't have time to hunt. But our uncles from Sacramento would come up and hunt pheasants and quail and doves and ducks. But that's shotgun.
Yeah.
And my mama would get up in the morning and make homemade biscuits for him, and that was just the big thing. But not big game hunting wasn't until I married my husband, and that was a hunting family.
Right.
And it wasn't long, and I was, gutting out deer and making jerky. And, Granddad Nash, how he made jerky? He just got heavy salt water boiling, very heavy concentration of salt, cut strips of venison, put a string in it, and dipped it 3 times, and then hung it up over the wood stove, and boy, that kept a long, long time.
Yeah, I bet.
And it preserved it. I just remember that.
I might have to try that.
Yeah.
Might mix a little sugar in with it too.
Yeah, you could be creative.
Yeah.
But we're getting away from the subject.
Well, that's all right. Granddad Nash, Chief Nash, my great granddad. What was his wife's name?
Laverne.
Laverne. So I heard a story that one time he sat down to dinner that Laverne had made, and there was no meat. And he said, "Why is there no meat?" And she said, "Because we don't have any meat." And he said, "That will never happen again." And it didn't. Is that a true story?
Well, I haven't heard that story, but I believe it to be the truth, because my father-in-law rode with Charlie Russell, and that era of cowboys, they lived on wild meat or beef, and in the form of jerky, because there was no refrigeration, but meat was maybe the only thing they had at the meal, because meat will stick with you. It builds muscle, strength. It does all the things. It's like the Native Americans, the Indians, meat. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially northern tribes were a lot more meat focused than some of the southern tribes that could be, better at farming practices and things like that.
Yeah, corn.
Yeah. No, but I think that's interesting that what you said about your granddad being sort of too busy with the dairy to be concerned with hunting. And I'm sure that there was, a meat byproduct from being around the dairy as well. We did some math on it the other day, and before he got into the larger scale dairy, he was milking 1,000 pounds of milk by hand every single day. That's incredible.
Well, when he worked for Ador Farms in Camarillo during the Depression, he was lucky he had a job. Most people didn't have a job, but he had a job, so we had a nice little house.
Dad said his forearms were just massive.
Oh, yeah. Milking cows. I mean, I'm strong today because I milked a lot of cows.
Yeah.
I'm strong. And when you're young and you just keep doing that, you don't get arthritis or anything because you just use them. And, I inherited, a lot of genes too. But yeah, Daddy loved his work. He loved the cows. He was so happy because he had such an unhappy childhood, and he was living his dream. He'd milk those cows, and he gloried in the quality of his milk, and it was all a labor of love. If you love what you do, it's going to be good. And he raised the best golden Guernseys in the state of California without even trying, because he loved it so much. He watched what they ate. They were contented cows. I mean, those cows didn't want for anything. They had shade to lay down in and chew their cud. They had the best feed. I mean, we went without clothes so that fancy clothes, so that those cows could eat a balanced ration to not only grow them, but to produce the quality of their milk. And we didn't know. I mean, we weren't poor. My mother made all our clothes. It's just that we only had like 2 dresses. But you had to pay the feed bill for the cows because that was our income. And it was marginal. It wasn't much, but we were making a living on the dairy, on a little 240-acre place that he cleared. I mean, it was oak trees, and Daddy was out there cutting trees between milkings. So it could make pasture and digging ditches to irrigate.
Lloyd Carlson, the rancher that I worked for there in Twin Bridges, Montana, he said that you can't starve $1 off a cow.
No.
And that's absolutely true.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Nope. If I didn't take care of my chickens like I did, people go, well, how do you have such good luck with my chickens? I'm there every morning for them. It's just like my kids. You feed them. You love them. You treat them just like a garden. You're going to get a good garden. If you don't do your kids right, you're not going to get kids. It's just a common sense thing. And I had a perfect example of that with my mom and dad. We had balanced meals. And even though Mama was so busy, she had a vegetable garden, and we ate dairy, beef. Dairy beef's not all that bad. And pot roast and stew. We had meat every day. We had eggs every day, and we had fresh stuff. And Mama canned. She canned hundreds of quarts. we were in a fruit area. She canned hundreds of quarts of peaches and cherries and plums and pears, and that's just what you did.
One of my favorite canned things that you make is dill pickled green beans. How do you do it?
Well, first you have to raise the good green beans. See, everything starts with fresh produce. So you pick them, you come home and put them in sterilized jars, stand them up straight, and then you make a brine of a ratio of vinegar and water and salt, and I put garlic in and dill, and then you pour that over them, seal them, and that's it.
You don't have to boil them. You just pour in the hot solution.
Oh, the extension service and stuff, everybody, when people haven't canned as long as the old timers, they have to make it safe. So they do a boiling water bath for an X amount of time to seal them and make it safe. But when you know how to can, like, you know the basic rules of canning, and sterilize your jars and your lids, and you're very careful about it's just a learned thing that, but you can't blame them because women, young girls today haven't been taught by their parents.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that that canning is a gender role thing. I went down and bought a couple bushels of peaches last year and canned them. And when I was picking up the peaches, the lady that was selling them goes, "Well, isn't it nice of you to pick these up for your wife?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not married." And she goes, "Well, who's going to can these?" And I said, "I am." And she goes, "Well, my word, I've never heard of a man canning peaches." I was like, "Well, I'm gonna."
Good for you, James. Good for you. Yeah, it's a skill we can't let go because they're so much better for you, and it's not that hard.
It's not that hard. Peaches are a great way to start too.
Oh yeah, and what to me, it's just such a thrill to take them out of the canner and there they are. It's not work. No, it's beautiful.
Well, so much food preservation now requires freezing or refrigeration. And if the power goes out for a couple days, you're done. Like you just lost all your food. That's nuts.
Yep.
So I think learning how to dehydrate some stuff. We have a freeze dryer, which does an incredible job. That's not for everybody though, but dehydrators are inexpensive. Anybody can do that. Water bath canning, that's very inexpensive. And if you get a good pressure canner, that thing will last multiple lifetimes.
You're absolutely right. And that's still how I eat. That's how I raised my family, was on homegrown everything, because I'll tell you, these preservatives, I'm sorry, folks, but they'll get you. They're not good.
Yeah.
They're just not good. And like you said, when the electricity goes out, it went out here when we had that storm, it was out for 4 hours, and I went, oh, all these electronic things we have around here are absolutely worthless. Mm-hmm. And I have a little cabin on the creek down there that's off the grid, and I got a land phone and a wood cook stove, and if I have to, I can carry water from the creek, fire up the wood cook stove, boil a little bit if I think I'm going to get bugs, but I probably wouldn't. But I mean, I can live off the grid. And how many people can say that?
Well, there's more folks that can say it than there are that can do it. And I guess I'm a little bit wrong there, because I think that we're all capable of it.
Yeah, you're right.
As far as toughness goes, like humans, existed for 60,000 years the way we are now without electricity. This is a new thing with us being comfortable and dependent upon electricity and the technologies that come with it. So we're all capable of it. We just need to brush up on those skills a little bit.
Well, let me tell you a story about down there. I have people literally from all over the world that have come down there, and in the winter. And so I go down there for 2 or 3 months now in the winter, and I cook on my wood stove. And they go, oh. and they have a distant memory of visiting a great grandma once when they were little, and they never forgot the stove. So they look at the stove and they touch it reverently, and they go, can I do this? And a lot of them I teach, because, you can't just put wood in there. Starting a fire is an art. I can't believe that people, they don't really know how to start a fire, or the type of wood, the wood that gives off heat. And you have to adjust that heat. And it's an art, cooking a wood stove. I just did it all my life, so I just took it for granted. But, these people don't. And you have a solid top, and you shift it back when you want it to simmer. You can't turn it on high and low. You got to know where that is. And us old grandmas, we just know. But, and so pretty soon I got them doing hotcakes and stuff. And these people they write me letters and they say, what you have down there in that little cabin and how you live is one of the most thrilling experiences I've ever had in my life. And these are people that are millionaires, and they've been all over the world. And they just want to come back and live simple. So that says something about our age. We're so reliant on technology that there's this great hunger, I observe, to go back to simple things. And then you can go out and listen to the creek going by and smell the fresh air and listen to the birds sing in the morning, wake up, and the stars come out, and there's no light pollution. You can see the light and the stars. And, this is what the world needs right now. And I don't know how to, because there's so many people, but this is what they crave, and they don't even know they crave it.
Yeah, that's true. I think cooking on a wood cook stove is not all that hard. It just requires a little bit of understanding and patience, and you can't just set your cast iron pan on one part of it and walk away and think that everything's going to be all right. What I am consistently defeated by, though, is a cast iron waffle maker. I have never made a good waffle with a cast iron waffle maker. I don't know if it can be done.
Well, I'll have to tell you, it's hard. And I'm stubborn. I'm stubborn, and I don't give up. And I was down there alone. And I had nothing but time, and I was going to write an essay about this. And so I have one of the most primitive wood stove waffle irons. My son got it at a state auction, and I was going to make that baby work. And I knew that it had to be really hot. Anyway, one of the handles was broken. There's a piece of wood stuck in it, like a limb of a tree or something. And I had 5 failures. Total failures. But I got onto it, and when I got the temperature just right, and I flipped it, you have to flip them over.
Yep.
And when I flipped it and I opened it up, I had a perfect waffle. But that's how you learn anything in life. You don't give up.
Yeah, you do it wrong a whole bunch of times in a row until you finally figure it out.
But the timing it's the heat. And then I oiled the griddle.
Yeah.
The grids. But I finally got a perfect waffle. But let me tell you, it was hard. It was well earned.
It is hard. I think I'm not getting it hot enough. And also, the one that I was using wasn't seasoned perfectly, and that's a problem. Because then the waffle just sticks to both sides. You go to open it up, it rips it in half, and then you've got this hot waffle iron that you can't get the ripped in half waffle out of, and you just give up and you let it cool down, and then it takes you forever to scrub it out, and then you're starting over the next day, and you're mad to begin with. I don't know. You're just better at it than I am, Grandma. I've got to work at it more.
You were absolutely right, James. If that thing has lost its season, you best give it away.
Yeah.
Because I don't really know how somebody has just mistreated it awfully, and it's hopeless. But this one had the right seasoning. And that, cast iron's tricky, and
Let's talk about cast iron a little bit.
That's all I use.
Yeah.
And you have to keep it seasoned.
Mm-hmm.
All
How
the
do you
time.
do it?
Well, you don't let it sit with water in it for 3 days.
Yeah.
That's a no-no.
Or food. Like if you let food sit in it for very long,
Yeah.
especially anything that's got tomato in it,
Yeah.
you're done.
Well, I learned from the old cowboys like Kid Marks, and of course I've cooked on cast iron for a long, long time. I used to cater. They'd fly me into Red's Horse Ranch with my heavy cast iron Dutch ovens, and I did the meat and beans in the ground. That was my specialty. But back to cast iron, you have to keep it seasoned and care for it just very diligently. And they say don't eat a lot of fatty things like bacon, but I'll tell you, there's nothing like good bacon, and cook bacon in there and leave that bacon grease in there. Don't wash that pan. Just kind of take a little brush and put bacon grease, get a little paper towel, leave it in there. And every time you use a pan, and I wash them with, soap and water, and then they're hot from the hot water. I put it over there, take that paper towel with the bacon grease and smear it around there. It's seasoned. It's ready to go.
Yeah. So you use like Dawn dish soap on your cast iron, right?
No, I use Wallowa Valley cleaning products.
Oh, okay.
And the dishwashing liquid won't hurt your septic tank, and it's green. It's good for the environment, and it's very good on cast iron.
Gotcha. So a lot of people think that you can't use soap at all ever. But if it's seasoned really well, you can use a mild soap and it doesn't hurt anything at all.
If it's seasoned right, and like say you've had something fried and it's kind of stuck, well, I just pour a little hot water from my tea in there to loosen it up, and then I do the dishes immediately. And when it's still hot, I use soap because, you want a clean pan for your next. You don't want the last night's meal to taste like your brand new thing. So just do that, but always take that. And sometimes you don't need to, because if you use them all the time like I do, they're seasoned. And if you clean them right away, but if they look a little dull, just take that paper towel and put it in bacon grease or bear fat, bear lard,
Crisco,
anything like that, olive oil,
and
just keep it like that, and then she's ready to go. Yeah.
If you're starting over, like if it's lost its seasoning, something's gone wrong, maybe you bought this thing at a yard sale, it was all rusted up, whatever. You can get rust out of them with vinegar and water really easily. It doesn't take much scrubbing. You don't have to go crazy with a wire brush or...
Don't ever use a wire brush on cast iron.
Yeah.
That is like reasons to go to jail.
Yeah. Prison.
Although my husband Doug, or steel wool, oh my God, you get slapped in the hand. Steel wool? Oh no. No, please no. Be gentle. But my husband Doug once took my fry pans that were all seasoned, but they had a buildup on the bottom, out to the shop and took one of those things that like grinders.
Yeah. Like a wire wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he came back, and here was this pan. It took me 5 years to season that baby. Yeah. No, don't do that.
Yeah. No, looking over at these things right now, there's like different epochs of history underneath the layers on that one on the left.
Fed a lot of people. You should see the ones in the oven. But that doesn't hurt it. It's like, my car has a deer ran into me up at the lake. I was going 5 miles an hour, ran off Moraine and ran into my door, and it didn't die, but the door squeaks. And so, but the motor is really good. So I'm not going to fix the door because I keep my motor of my car running really good. Well, this is like the fry pan. The inside where you cook's really good. The outside's built up, but it's the motor that is important.
Yeah.
It's a long ways from its heart.
Sure. That doesn't hurt anything to have some layers of crust built up on the outside.
No, not at all. You should see cow camps. Oh, but those old boys, they knew their pans hanging up are all seasoned. They can whip them off the nail and put them on that wood stove. You should have seen Kid Marks make sourdough biscuits. We'd be riding all day long up there at Harl Butte, him and Mary and I come in, unsaddle the horses. He'd go into the little shack, the little cabin at the cow camp at Mahogany.
I was there yesterday.
You were at Mahogany yesterday?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, anyway, that's where I had the best sourdough biscuits in my life. And he'd come in and start the fire up. He had the sourdough rising all day,
Mm-hmm.
and he took out of the jug and he put it in a wash basin, put flour in it, dumped it in there, worked it all up like this, took globs, put it in this grease pan with bacon grease, turned it over once, set it in the warming oven it was in the fall, warming oven of the stove. Boy, those babies just rose up, and he went about cooking other stuff, and Mary opened a can of her peaches, and God, in a half hour we had those biscuits were so light they just floated up out of that pan.
Yeah. No, Mahogany Cow Camp still there. Got a sign there now. There are some folks getting set up for archery camp, I think. But I was out there coyote hunting and ended up calling in a pack of coyotes and shooting one at last light. Not at Mahogany, more out towards Jane's Ridge.
Oh, Jane's Ridge. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where the McAllisters ran sheep, my mom's side.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. On Jane's Ridge, spelled Jayne.
Yeah.
And I spent many happy times in Harl Butte, and the Marflat cow camp was moved. Anyway, I got quite a story on that, but at what they call Harl Butte cow camp.
Yeah. Well, we've had a few grizzlies move through the country in the last few years coming out of Idaho and stuff, but prior to that, the last grizzly that was known to be killed in Oregon was killed by my grandpa out there on Jane's Ridge. Yeah. Wow. I think there's a sign about it in the Oregon Zoo, actually, which is a little bit odd.
That is very odd.
But, yeah.
Zoo. Oh my God. Wonder what that connection was.
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
That's interesting country.
The huckleberries are not looking good this year.
Too hot.
There's very few of them. What's there is little tiny. A lot of them just dried before they could even get ripe.
Well, I guess you're not going to get your pie.
No, not this year. Not this year.
They're good. That pie's good with blackberries, and it's a good blackberry year.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the blackberries are a little smarter because they grow down by the creeks where they're going to get water no matter what.
Right.
There's terrible droughts in Europe right now. I don't know if you heard about that, but they're finding these carvings in rocks that are like 500 years old from the last time that the water levels were this low, and they call them like hunger rocks or starvation rocks, but there's carvings that say if you can read this, prepare to die and stuff like that because gosh. Obviously 500 years ago, if you had this kind of drought, it's not like you could just order up some fresh rice from China. Like you're kind of out of luck. Wow. But yeah, they've had a terrible drought this year.
Oh, that's sad. It really is. Well, it hasn't been very long that we've, in the total scheme of things, that we have kept records on weather.
Right.
And so that's very interesting that would be written, because we think we're going through weird times, but maybe we're not. Maybe history repeats itself.
It's been so much weirder before.
Yes.
Last year I was doing so much research on Beringia, on the Bering Land Bridge, and the Pleistocene, which was our last major ice age. And that only ended like 10 to 14,000 years ago. There's glaciers that went all the way to Mississippi.
Wow.
It's interesting to me how you could have a landscape that was so covered with ice and glaciers and snow, and it's all white and it's reflecting any heat that can come in. And then somehow it warms up from that. You would think it would only get colder and colder. Like the more ice you have, the more it's going to reflect the sunlight, the colder it's going to be, the more ice you're going to have the next year. And it went on for a couple million years like that. And then all of a sudden it starts to melt.
Yep. There's so much we don't know, and I like that.
Yeah.
Because, humans, a lot of humans think they have it all figured out, but they don't. And I like it that they haven't defined infinity.
Sure.
And I hope they don't. And if you look up at the stars at night, if you're a camper, and I just spent a couple nights up at the lake with some friends, and we watched the Perseids meteor showers.
Mm.
And of course, it's getting toward the tail end of them. But, the black hole, and you contemplate all that. And there's no way that there's a lot of magic goes on that I hope we never figure out. And I don't think we will, because we're just, the universe has been here long before we have. And,
Well, you grew up during a time when cars were uncommon. Airplanes were uncommon, and now we're talking about figuring out how to populate Mars. Like, what an incredible time that you've been alive.
I know but you can't go backwards. My mother told me this. She was a very intellectual lady, and she said, you can't go back. You got to go forward. And I always remember that. And a lot of distinguished older people will say that, oh, you get to be alive when these changes occur, And when you look at it like that, it's a wonderful thing to be old and have, like you said, we never had a car when I was growing up. We had a pickup. And I remember one time when us 5 kids were so excited. That pickup was old. I mean, when we'd go anywhere in it, we had to ride in the back because the nuts and bolts would fall off of it. It was old. And Mama says, we're going to go get a new car. So us kids, it was a hot day in the foothills of California, and we sat in the car and we just waited for our daddy to drive this new car so we could see it. And we saw this guy come out of this shop, and we all peered out, and it was Daddy, but it was another used pickup. We never had a car.
Yeah.
And but we were raised so rich because we had freedom.
Yeah.
So
that piece of ground that your dad bought was 240 acres, ran 80 head of cows, had a house.
It wasn't really a house. It was a shack.
It was a shack. Yeah.
We had an outhouse. Us kids never had our own bedroom. We had blankets that separated our rooms from my brother's room. And see, I got married at 17 and left that shack.
Mm-hmm.
Later, when they sold some property, the other kids, I was the oldest, they got to live in really modern houses. I remember what a shock it was to go up there, and my mother had a phonograph. She had a phonograph. I mean, we just had a radio, and TV didn't come until we didn't get a TV until 3 of my kids were born.
Yeah.
And there were horrible shows. I mean, they were just Inner Sanctum, and but we were just fascinated with it. But I've seen so many changes, James, just so rapid, that it's almost mind-boggling. But I'm still in that. I still have those skills.
Sure.
From the beginning.
Before that country was farmland, the 49ers had gone through it and dredged a lot of it, hadn't they?
That was the heart of the gold country. El Dorado County was next to us. We were Placer County. That's placer mining, where they used the water. And we had dredger ponds. There would be heaps of rocks and gravel and the ponds were left. And there were ditches dug by the Chinese. And the Chinese wheelbarrows, their shovels. Daddy would collect all these things. And there was gold in Doty's Ravine. All the ravines, they called them ravines, not creeks. If you went down there and panned, you always got gold if you were patient, because they couldn't get all the gold out of there. But it just wasn't lucrative to do it later.
Right.
But yeah, we were raised in the heart of the gold country. Yeah, that was our heritage.
Mm.
Yeah.
And Native Americans had been there for a long time before that.
Oh yeah.
The Spanish during that time as well, not before the Native Americans, but for hundreds of years before other Europeans got there.
Yeah, the Miwok, we called them Digger Indians, but the Miwok, I think they were Miwok. We had what we call Indian rock. And there were little holes ground in the rock all over our ranch, but one particular one was huge. And the acorns, there were numerous acorns, and they took the acorns and they ground them with a stone pestle and made a sort of bread. And living was easy down there because it wasn't real cold in the winter, and they had deer, and they had the acorn bread, and they had fish. And so they were not like the Nez Perce that were, the tall and the hunters, and it's a totally different deal. And up in Northern California with Ishi would be the same thing, the acorns, and he probably had the same kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That was an amazing story, Ishi.
So incredible. Yeah.
Oh.
I've talked about it on the show before, but...
Theodore Kroger was the professor in charge of him at the University of California at Berkeley.
Yep.
And they took him down there. He ended up dying of pneumonia. But that was an interesting study. And I felt sorry for Ishi because he was the last one. He comes stumbling out of there to that slaughterhouse.
Yeah, expecting to be killed.
And he left no trace for years, so he wouldn't be discovered. I would have loved to have seen Ishi. And I always thought they should have let him, because he died in captivity. It was like a wild animal,
I think he was pretty happy, though, from what I've read. He had a job. He marveled at a lot of like the goods that were available to him. One of his favorite inventions that he got to use was glue. Right? So think of all the things that he would have broken and needed to repair that could have been made possible with glue. But the closest thing he had to glue was like grinding up salmon skins or something like that.
Or pitch.
Yeah.
Well, did you read more than Ishi then? Did you? Because Ishi just kind of...
I've read a couple books about it.
Okay, see, because Ishi doesn't cover that part.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, he worked as a janitor in the school, but also did demonstrations on archery and on how to make arrowheads and the ways that he survived. And he went back to that canyon that he was living in with Saxon Pope and I think one other guy, and showed them, how he could make all these different sounds to call in birds, and his range of vocalizations for mimicking animal sounds was massive. Oh. And he was shooting birds out of the air with his bow and like doing really incredible things. Yeah. His style of shooting was also very different, as was his language. His language was dissimilar to all the other North American native languages.
They said Stone Age. They think he came from the last of the Stone Age Indians.
Yeah, or much earlier. So his shooting style was Mongolian.
Oh, interesting.
So he shot with his thumb to release the bowstring rather than his fingers, which was a major difference. Yeah. And his left hand went on the bow, but the arrow went on the right side of the bow, on the right side of the riser. Oh. So he had a very, very unorthodox style of shooting, but it worked extremely well. Yeah, for him.
He survived.
And modern American archery is an amalgamation of archery styles from around the world, really collected by Saxon Pope. But he started with Ishi, and he found that the best bow in the world at the time was the English longbow. And
really?
He ended up taking styles from the Persian Empire, from the British, from Native Americans, and sort of combining them all to make a style of shooting that became American archery.
That's fascinating. You've really read up on this, James.
Oh, I mean, this is my thing, right?
Yeah. Have you ever read Everett Roos?
Yeah. Wilderness is in the title.
Well, I've got 3 books on him, but he disappeared into the wilds, and he was brilliant. Okay. He was brilliant, and he took a burro and disappeared, and for years they didn't find him. But he wrote letters home, but his mind, he was absolutely brilliant. But he was the best in the wilderness. That was where he had to be. I got 3 books sitting right over there, and that's a real study. So that's kind of like Ishi too, except that Ishi was lonely, and this guy was at home.
Yeah,
there. but he still had to have that connection. He wrote to his mother, and they got the letters. But his mind was incredible.
Well, the type of doubt that Ishi must have had, he as a little kid, he'd seen most of his tribe get killed. As a young adult, he'd gotten separated from his family. Like they got startled by some surveyors. There was only 4 of them left, so they're split. And then I can't remember who he ended up with, but that member of his immediate family ended up dying. And then he made it a couple of years completely alone. And then to come into town and end up at a slaughterhouse of all places, what a horrible place for your mind to be.
Oh, I just can't believe it. Well, this Professor Kroger used him as a study.
Yeah.
And so I guess my book just ends with him dying of pneumonia. I didn't know. How in the world did they, the language thing to find out all about him? I mean, how'd that happen?
Well, I mean, there was lots of professors who were interested, but that tribe had a different language for the men than it did for the women. And little kids spoke the women's language until they went through their rite of passage, if they were a boy, and then they were able to learn and then speak the men's language. Like, there are so many things about that tribe that were unique in the whole world. Wow. Really incredible.
I got to reread that again and follow up on that, because that just fascinates me. Because, the way the world's going, it could happen again. If somebody wanted to write a novel, it'd really be a novel. Isn't the last person left? Of course, people have tried to write that. But
well, the reason that, I keep bringing up the Pleistocene area is that that's not our only ice age. We've been in many ice ages on this planet. And the fact that humans kind of became what we are now, like the modern Homo sapien, during this Pleistocene period, when the poles were completely covered with ice and there was just a narrow band around the equator that was really habitable. But also, it was like 30,000 years ago that people first came out of Asia and into Beringia, which is, the underwater portion between Alaska and Russia. And we talk about it as a land bridge, and that's such a mistake. Yeah. Because it was about 60 miles or so from Asia to North America, but it was hundreds of miles from north to south. So to call it a bridge is ridiculous. But about 30,000 years ago is when they first started to come into that area, but because there was massive ice sheets, like the Cordilleran ice sheet that went all the way to Idaho, they weren't able to continue traveling past interior Alaska. They were stuck there in Alaska and Beringia and on the Aleutians for 15,000 years, 20,000 years.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. And some people think that that's why there's not really advanced civilizations in North and South America as compared to Europe and Central Asia, because people have just had less time to get going here. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's correct, but that is one of the theories.
Yeah. Also, what's interesting to me as an elder to try to grapple with is that America, because in our blood, your blood, my blood, we have a relative way back that came over in the Mayflower. Look how quickly, so Europe or nobody had electricity.
Right.
It's the ones from here that, Thomas Edison, we were the leader. So why was that? Because we had the freedom to do it? Or
I don't know. Jared Diamond wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel that talked about how some societies advanced technologically while others did not. And you go to like the cradle of humankind in the Rift Valley in like Ethiopia, not a technologically advanced society. So how did this happen? And that's really the thesis of his book, and he breaks down his theories on that, which basically comes down to access and interactions with guns, germs, and steel.
Okay, that's interesting. Because if a civilization like in the Rift Valley were perfectly content with their life and didn't desire to change it, why would they?
Sure. Yeah. Well, some people have this unchecked ambition and a sense of nostalgia where they want to create more in their life than they can use so that they can leave it behind so that there will be a memory of them or something like that. Other people do not have that. And it's not saying one way is better than another at all. Who am I to say?
Right.
But there's some people that are pretty darn happy that, they don't necessarily have that ambition. They're happy to get by with just enough.
Yep.
And when they're gone, and that's it.
That's a very interesting concept. And, there's such a thing as hybrid vigor, and this new country in its its wilderness, except for the native people that went on the same for years and years and years and didn't, of course, they were warring too. I mean, there's all that stuff, that dynamic. But maybe the hybrid vigor of them crossing and then these different cultures all, because America's unique that way. It was the new world, the last frontier, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at like just Alaska, you have the Eskimo, the Inuit, the Aleut, and then, you've got Athabascans and Tlingits, and everybody looked physically different from each other.
Yeah.
And these were the first peoples to come across and stay there. I think that the people that continued migrating and moving were often the rejects of society, right? So they're like, hey, you're no longer welcome to be here. You got to keep going. Like, where do I go? Well, I can't go back. I can't go back to Asia. What happens if I keep going east? Well, we don't know. Nobody's ever done that. All right, well, I'm going to go over there and find out. And then, the rejects from that society have to keep going, and eventually they go south. And that's kind of how people came to the East Coast on the Mayflower. Like they weren't able to function the way they wanted to in Britain. So it's like, all right, let's sail west and see what happens.
Yeah.
What's really interesting to me, especially when I go back to like New Hampshire on the East Coast, there are descendants of those first settlers who, made this massive, adventurous, scary crossing of the Atlantic, got to America. As soon as they got out of the boat, they built a house, and they've stayed there for 10 generations.
That's amazing.
It is kind of amazing, isn't it?
It is. But yet there was that go west young man thing and the orphans. And there were, my daddy was orphaned, but that wasn't unusual. There were thousands of orphans because tuberculosis was rampant and of the Irish that came over and the Germans that came over, they were poor. And they had orphan trains that brought orphans out west, and a lot of them spilled off into that era of Charlie Russell. The cowhand, the lonely cowhand that went from ranch to make a living were generally orphans.
Mm-hmm. And like Pony Express advertised specifically for orphans. That's what they were looking for.
They did. So you had these people coming out, and they met, well, a lot of them, married, they had children with the Indian, there was that. But this great meshing and children of a mixed hybrid vigor, I call it.
Yeah.
And so there's no real American.
Yeah, no.
Never has been.
Sure, including Native Americans. Like the tribes were dissimilar as well. Kind of like what I was talking about with the different tribes that I could think of off the top of my head from Alaska. But no, I like being here. It's a good place.
I do too. It's the best place. It's just endlessly fascinating, and I haven't seen it all. I've been here 54 years.
Yeah. And
I've seen a lot of it, the outback, but I just want to go see it all. It's just, and the people are absolutely, the old timers we're losing. We lost a lot of stories. I tried to capture a lot of them, but oh my goodness. And in trunks and letters, if any of you have out there, anybody that listens to this has letters from ancestors, get them to our museum and get them archived.
Yeah.
Because that's the stuff, the real stuff. Like you want to know about your wildlife habitat. I mean, what wildlife was here. That'll be in the letters. It'll be in the diaries that people keep.
I mean, that's how I found that moose were a historic animal in Oregon.
Wow.
And ODFW said for years that they wouldn't create a moose recovery plan for the few moose that were here because they were not a normal species here. They didn't used to be here. And then I found that in 1903 we had a regulated moose season in Oregon.
Amazing.
So it's like, all right, what now? It's like, well, we're still not going to do the work if we don't care about moose. But they used to be here, and had I not had that old scrapbook that somebody had pasted the hunting regulations into, then there may be no evidence left whatsoever that they are in fact a historic species in Oregon.
Yep.
Sure would be nice if we could protect them and not just let wolves eat every last one of them.
Yeah, I got too many passions, but one of them is history. And historians are just now, well, not just now, but more than ever saying that is our most valuable resource, is the little grandma or the wife in an isolated place that puts down things like that. That's our only record of that isolated area we have.
Yeah.
And diaries are so important because tomorrow's history. Every day that we live, then the day before is history. And if it isn't recorded, those little details get lost and big news takes over. You can't hear that stuff. But it's the little person that keeps the diaries or writes a letter. We don't write letters anymore. So that stuff isn't recorded.
Yeah.
Postcards used to come with just one thing. Saw a grizzly bear today.
Yeah.
Well, there it is. There's your proof. Or photograph, an old photograph. Those glass plates. I have a book on that some woman kept. The only records we have.
Right. And what's interesting to me about it is that what you might write down or take a picture of today could seem like it's of no consequence.
Right.
You have no idea how big of a deal that could be in 100 years or 1,000 years.
Even the weather, mostly the weather. I mean, good Lord, the weather, day-to-day thing of weather.
Yeah.
They make a big deal of big events.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I read a thing about Judge Tippet, when they had such a drought that, cattle died. A whole bunch of cattle just died. They didn't have any feed and they couldn't get the water and they died. That was a long, long time ago.
Right. Something that can happen.
And it happens and floods, but if nobody writes it down or saves a newspaper or archives, right now we're learning the value of archiving. And it's like we couldn't figure out Ishi, but somebody's doing it, and we need to know, and this is often said, we need to know where we came from so we can go forward and not make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Give us the best of luck.
It's the best of luck. I seem to not get it, but yeah.
Well, good luck with your garden, Grandma. Let me know when the scores start coming on.
Okay, would you like some zucchini? I just picked it last night.
Yes, I would like some zucchini.
How about Kelsey? I bet she likes it.
She does. She would also like some zucchini.
Okay, I'm going to give you some of that and some plums.
Okay.
That someone brought me from my tree on the creek.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Grandma.
You bet. Bye.
I'm working on building a house this year, which is something that I know nothing about. And I love that. It's exciting. Everything is a new challenge, and there's lots of challenges that pop up. The other day, we were laying out rebar and getting ready to pour concrete for the foundation of the shop that's going to be next to the house. And one of the guys that was there that was helping, one of the construction crewmen, I looked over and he had a Stanley thermos sitting on the end of the trailer. I said, how do you like that thing? And he goes, oh, I love it. I've had it for a decade. It's like, if you find any environment where people are out there working hard with their hands outside, no matter the conditions, you're probably going to see a Stanley product there. It's something that just goes with that blue collar labor, because that's what this product is doing. It is out there working just as hard as you are. It's going to be there as long as you are. It's going to be there after you're done. It's something that I feel passionate about with every piece of gear that I take either into the woods or into the workplace. Like, it's got to be able to outwork me, and I work really hard myself. If you are also a hard worker, and I'm sure that you are, then you could probably appreciate the same type of gear. If you go to stanley1913.com and you use the discount code 6ranch, that's the number 6 and the word ranch, you can get 25% off just about any of their products. And I encourage you to do that. They're a great supporter of this show and great supporter of this audience. Again, I love you guys, and I just want to pass this discount and the savings on to you. If you want something from Stanley, I encourage you to get it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at 6ranch Podcast or me at 6ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the 6ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the 6ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.